My name is David Hartgrove. I've been the conservation chair for Halifax River Audubon officially since 1992. I thought it was since 1987. I was born in North Carolina, High Point, North Carolina. In 1949, my father found out that he had an opportunity for a job down in Miami that paid him about twice what he was making in North Carolina. So we relocated down to Miami. I was born in 47. Moved down to Miami, and I grew up there. I can't tell you the monumental changes that I saw take place in Miami over the course of my life there. The area where we lived at one time had all been cow pasture. When I was a kid, we'd go out in the woods and go to dig foxholes because, of course, we were playing war and all those things. And we would come across cow bones, and we thought this was a really special. Just realized that somebody's cow had died out in the middle of the pasture is all it was. So I was in the Boy Scouts. I knew what a blue jay was. I knew what a mockingbird was. I thought I knew what a red-headed woodpecker was until I saw my first field guide and realized I'd been looking at red-bellied woodpeckers because red-headed woodpeckers don't generally occur down that far south in Florida. So I went to work for Florida Power and Light right after I got out of high school. I went to Vietnam in 1969. When I went into the service, my seniority with FPL continued because of the Selective Service Act. So when I came back, I bid a job up in Titusville. I was there for about 11 months, something like that, and that just wasn't a very good fit for me. So I ended up back down in Miami. I had been married at the time, had two young kids, divorced August of 1972, moved into the Groovy Grove through my hippie period, at the time still working for FPL. By this time I was a lineman for Florida Power and Light, and I bid what's called a troubleman's job, a guy who drives around in a truck by himself. It's now called restoration specialist. They changed it from troubleman to make it gender neutral. Run the truck by yourself, get calls from over the radio or from now they have these mobile data terminals in the trucks. Went to the dermatologist the first time, probably about 1973. Had a keratoses removed off my arm. And the doctor told me then, he said, the less time you spend in the sunlight, the better off for you. So I started working midnight shift. I bid up here to Daytona Beach. I continued after some working around a little to get shift changes fixed and everything. I continued working midnight shift almost exclusively. In 1986, I guess it was, I was in the dispatcher's office one Sunday morning, 5 a.m. Sunday morning. On Channel 2, which back in the mid-1980s, there were only 4 channels coming out of Orlando. The public service program on, and they had a guy on there, and he was looking for volunteers for the first Florida Breeding Bird Atlas. A 5-year project to document nesting areas of all of the species of birds that nest in Florida. As you can imagine, a monumental task. And fortunately, there were a lot of volunteers working on it. He said that, you don't have to be an expert. We'll teach you what you need to know. And I thought to myself, well, this would be a fun project for my wife and I to work on together. We enjoy being outside. We enjoy looking at birds. I sent my postcard in because this was years before the internet or anything. And a couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from a guy over named Dave Stock, who is a biology professor at Stetson, and he was the coordinator for the Breeding Bird Atlas for Volusia County. So the first area that we were assigned was down by the Port Orange Bridge, and the only way to adequately cover it was to be in a canoe because the water is so shallow around a lot of the islands. So we borrowed a canoe from some friends, and that was the beginning of my immersion into what I call really hardcore birding. I spent the next 5 years, a couple of days a week. I'd get off at 7 o'clock in the morning, go out with friends of mine, Breeding Bird Atlas, looking for nesting birds and stuff, all in different spots around the county. In the process, becoming a much better birder myself because I was exposed to these guys who were so much better at it than I was. About 1987 was when I got this call from Mary Keller about doing signs for the fishing line. And that was, by that time I was a member of Halifax River Audubon. I had been an Audubon member even when I was down in Miami. But once I transferred up here, I didn't attend chapter meetings down there. I didn't attend chapter meetings here. I got involved in the peace group. Early 80s was when Dr. Ed Teller was convincing Ronald Reagan that we could survive a nuclear war. I and a lot of other like-minded people thought that this was insane. So we formed a group called the Volusians for a Peaceful World. And Volusians for a Peaceful World met at Seabreeze United Church, which was the same location that Halifax River Audubon met. So that's how I became associated with them. About this time was when I began to really get involved with Halifax River Audubon. The first project I got involved with, there was a woman named Mary Keller, for whom the Mary Keller Bird Sanctuary, or Bird Hospital at Marine Science Center is named. She used to live out in Holly Hill. Her house was overrun with birds, especially in the springtime when baby birds are out. She called me one day and she said, we have a problem with fishing line. She said, I get birds constantly that have been entangled in monofilament fishing line. Can you come up with some kind of a sign or something that we could put up that would encourage people to responsibly dispose of the old fishing line? I went to work on designing the sign, the verbiage to go on the sign. I had to figure out, well, who could pay for this? I transferred up here from Florida Power and Light. I originally hired on with Florida Power and Light down in Miami. And I moved here in January of 1981. The guy who was what's called the North Area Manager for Florida Power and Light was a guy named Bob Coleman. I called Bob and approached him with this idea of funding the signs, provided that on the signs it would say placed by Halifax River Audubon and FPL. That got us in the door. He cut a check for $5,000, making of the signs. He only had one requirement, that it had to be, we needed to use a guy to do this, to design the signs, named Butch Ambrose. Turned out that Butch's mom was his secretary. Butch is a very prominent artist up in Ormond Beach, but also had a little sign thing on the side. We got 25 signs printed up. I went around it. I installed probably half of them. The other half, the cities themselves wanted to install their signs. Fishing docks and things like that all over the east side of the county. The next thing I was involved in, as I say, in 1992, I think it's in the March issue of the Pelican of 1992, it's the first time that it actually shows me as the conservation chair. But it was a position that I thought I had for quite a while before that. And because I affiliated with the chapter about 1987, this was several years after my predecessor, Dr. Walter Boardman, had gone into assisted living facility. So I never got a chance to meet him and knew, what a profound effect he had on a lot of other people. But I never got a chance to meet him. I continued on my capacity as conservation chair. Some of the things that we got involved with, 1996, Halifax River Audubon started what was called the Bob Owens Award. Bob was a guy who worked for St. John's River Water Management District. And he and his wife had both served on the board of Halifax River Audubon. And when he passed away, the chapter decided to make this new award, Bob Owens, this award for people who do special projects as volunteers. First winner, Robert Wiley, who was from down in Sebastian, he was a computer expert. On his own time, developed a reliable, sustainable method of transplanting red mangrove. And this kind of revolutionized the whole idea of living shorelines and everything and being able to move that stuff around. So we gave him the award. Now, of course, there was no money that went with the award. It was just a fancy little plaque. That was supposed to be the first annual, and to my knowledge, I think that was the only one we ever did. It was something that just kind of fell by the wayside with all the other things that were coming along. 1998, there was an Eagle Scout project to construct an observation platform at Boardman Pond up on Walter Boardman Lane there in Bulow Creek State Park. We funded the construction of that project, and it was completed in January of 1998. In April of 98, we had a number of badly abused birds that began to wash ashore, primarily brown pelicans. There was one herring gull, but they were primarily brown pelicans that had either been shot or had clearly been beaten with a baseball bat or something like that. Most of these birds were already dead when they washed ashore. There were a couple that survived long enough to be taken to rehab, but they ended up being euthanized. All because there was, on some fishing or shrimping boat off the coast out there, there was some very disturbed individual who thought, these birds are taking money out of my pocket, and he was trying to kill them all. That's not the first time this has happened. The guy who founded Halifax River Audubon, Rupert Longstreet Elementary School is named down in Daytona Beach Shores. He founded Halifax River Audubon as the Halifax River Bird Club in 1923. He had gone down to some islands down in Mosquito Lagoon with Teddy Roosevelt and a couple of other people, and they had seen aftermath of a bunch of fishermen going through there slaughtering brown pelicans because the brown pelicans were, again, taking money out of their pockets. The pelicans eat too many fish, for there's not enough for them. I mean, this is insane. We're talking 1908 when this is going on. The waters were teeming with fish. At any rate, yes, this was the kind of thing that was going on. October of 1998, Florida Audubon President Clay Henderson attended the Florida Forestry Association meeting. Keynote speaker was the Deputy Florida Agriculture Commissioner, Nelson Pugh. His comments that day included the opinion that environmentalists were, quote, bunny huggers, prairie fairies, and reality impaired. Needless to say, for the president of Audubon to be sitting there in that meeting, that had some repercussions later on. Also in 1998, evidence began to appear that alligators in Florida, because of herbicide runoff, degraded and ran off into the stream. They became endocrine disruptors, which were causing male alligators to be born with penises that were too small to effectively fertilize females. And so there was this big hue and cry that there was going to be we were going to lose alligators. The alligators would eventually disappear. So it's all over the place. And as it breaks down in the sunlight, it becomes an endocrine disruptor, which affects, well, apparently, if you look at the gigantic number of alligators that are all over Florida nowadays, apparently the alligators figured out a way to work it out. In January of 2000, Ann Moore, who lives on Distant up in Flagler County, approached the state about getting outstanding Florida waterway status for Lake Distant. She and her neighbors up there had been taking water samples and sending them into the lab in Gainesville. We're consistently being told that Lake Distant was one of the most pristine water bodies in the entire state of Florida. Well, about the time she filed this petition, a developer bought a piece of property on the opposite side of the lake from her and wanted to put in 320 houses, I forget what else, but it was going to have stables, and the stables would be down right next to the edge of the lake. So of course all of the nutrients from the stables, from the manure and everything else, would run off into the lake. She did a lot of groundwork. Chapter wrote letters to help her fight. Were able to renegotiate the stables, ended up being moved to the other side of the property. When she went before the environmental quality and passed out, when she went before the Environmental Regulation Commission, there used to be something called the ERC, and they were the ones who would bestow this outstanding Florida waterway status on Lake Distant. When she went before them in 1997, she brought along little bottles of bottled water from Lake Distant, and she turned hers up and drank it, and she said, "I hope I can do this again in 20 years." And that was very effective little piece of theater, much ensured that the lake would get its outstanding Florida waterway status. November 2000, Governor Jeb Bush received a proposal from an outfit called CourseLink LLC, proposing to turn the north half of North Peninsula State Recreation Area, which is now North Peninsula State Park, into a golf course. There was already a 9-hole golf course just north of the property. They wanted a 99-year lease on the north part of the park, golf course in. Who conducted their environmental assessment stated that, quote, "This area is a remnant piece of coastal scrub with no particularly special ecological value." To say that there were no Florida scrub jays on the property and that the only colonies of the birds on the East Coast were in Brevard County. These revelations would come as a shock to the threatened and endangered, to the two family groups of Florida scrub jays that were resident on the property, along with threatened and endangered species like gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, and mole skinks. It turned out that he was eschewing monetary reimbursement for his work. He wanted to be paid in stock in the golf course. Hard to believe that they actually tried to ram this through, but needless to say, it got shot down. Again, because Halifax River Audubon, Flagler Audubon, and other groups went to the meetings to put a stop to it. February 2003, there was a proposal to widen State Road 415 from State Road 46 to State Road 44. It ended up getting negotiated down to widening the road between State Road 46 and Howland Boulevard. That would have really done serious damage to a lot of little family farms and ranches along Tomoka Farms Road out there that suddenly turned it into a 4-lane divided road. In May 2005, the Leffler Tract, 5,000 plus acres of prime wetlands and uplands east of Deltona, was suddenly in play as Deltona sought to annex the property. The rules state that municipality cannot annex property unless they are physically contiguous to the property that they're going to annex. They went in and bought this little tiny piece of strip of land to make that contiguous so that they could get to this Leffler property. And the Leffler family wanted to sell the property to Deltona. They wanted to be incorporated in Deltona. Volusia County filed a lawsuit to prevent it. Our chapter and the Environmental Council filed an amicus curiae brief to join the suit against allowing this to take place. And it turned out, after going through appeals court and everything else, property turned and eventually became Deep Creek Preserve. It eventually was saved, but it took about 8 years to get that, to go through that process. September 2005, the extension of Tomoka Farms Road from US 92 to LPGA Boulevard. At first, the county staff recommended against extension of the road. Since this wasn't in the county's comprehensive plan, it had to be passed by the State's Department of Community Affairs. All of these valuable protections for land use and everything were wiped out under Governor Scott. So there is no more Department of Community Affairs, and there's no more comprehensive plan. They have a plan, but it's not under the same thing, enforced by the same stricture of rules. The county council voted 4-3 against the comp plan amendment to allow construction. And that was because the county council chambers were full of people screaming about, don't do this, don't do this. After everybody went home, right at the end of the meeting, one of the council members asked for the comp plan amendment to reconsider the motion. And all of a sudden now it passed 4-3. Everybody felt betrayed. The road was built, the car lots, they're all along the west side of the west side of the road there are now jammed up right along the edge of the Tomoka River. Again, an outstanding Florida waterway that should have been given higher levels of protection that way. And finally, in September, we finally made progress on getting into what we called Rookery Island, which is the little island immediately south of the Port Orange Bridge. It was from January to at least to the end of August, and actually for most of the year, the island was covered with birds. Up to 400 pairs of brown pelicans nested there, great egrets, snowy egrets, tricolored herons, cattle egrets, double-crested cormorants, all nested on this island. It was a very fertile little piece of land. We had gone to the city, we had gone to the county, we'd gone to the state, asking who can give us permission to put up signs around the island to keep people off the island, to keep them from harassing the birds. People don't realize that, they don't think they're harassing the birds because the guy goes up there, parks his boat to throw a cast net for fish. In the process of doing that, he's disturbing the birds because they think he's there to eat them or their babies. Finally, somebody suggested, why don't you contact the Florida Inland Navigation District, because they have jurisdiction over those islands. I got an email address for a guy named David Roach, who was the executive director of FIND. And I sent him an email outlining what we wanted to do and why. I didn't hear from him for about 2 weeks, and I thought, we've been blown off by another government agency. All of a sudden, I get this email, and it's got like a 25 gig attachment on it. It's a gigantic attachment on it. And it turns out that not only did we have permission to post the signs, we were mandated to post the signs, because in February of 1960, Florida Inland Navigation District sat down with Florida Audubon and 2 members from our chapter who had driven down to West Palm Beach for this meeting, a guy named Conrad Ekdahl and T.J. Wetherell, who was the father of T.K. Wetherell, who went on to become Speaker of the House in Tallahassee. Pretty famous local family in Port Orange. They had gone down there to see if they could get permission to put up signs. Florida Inland Navigation District and Audubon, Florida, dedicated what they called the Port Orange Wildlife Sanctuary. All this documentation that David Roach sent me showed sanctuary, the boundaries of the sanctuary actually extend from a little bit north of the bridge all the way down to an area called Ponce Cut, which if you're in the Intercoastal Waterway and you want to make your turn and go out into the ocean through Ponce Inlet, Ponce Cut is where you make your turn to go out there. So it's about 4 miles along the west side of the Intercoastal. It encompasses a bunch of islands, at least a couple of which are privately owned. Included in the boundaries of the refuge sanctuary, Seabird Island Mobile Home Park. Now, it had only opened 2 years earlier, and I don't think the people sitting down there in West Palm Beach realized that they were enclosing this privately owned mobile home park in the boundaries of the sanctuary, but it's in there. And then about a mile and a half, about 2 miles down on the west side, there's another privately owned island down there that the guy who owns it at one point was going to try and some eco-friendly cabins on it. He was going to have FPL bore a cable to provide power to him from all the way over along US 1 and Commonwealth Boulevard. I don't think he had any idea what he was getting into, because this would have cost several $1 million to do this project. And because it's not already there, you pay. FPL doesn't pay. You as the property owner pays to have this extended to it. Well, that was the end of that process. So their guy's there's still a privately owned island down there. If you go online, you can find it listed for sale. I don't remember now what he's trying to sell it for. It's got a couple of nice palm trees on it. It's high enough you could, put the cabins on it, but it's never going to happen.